There's different ways that you can shade this. Actually, some people would go back in with the pencil and shade in with the pencil if you want some sort of smooth transitions. So I'm gonna do part of it with the pencil, and then I'm going to show you shading with pen and ink lines, so like dotting and stippling and things of that nature, to give you an idea of a couple different ways you can do this. So I'm gonna start out with just the pen and ink, and I'm gonna do the flowers with the lines. And you can see there's the line here in comparison to the other one is a thinner line. And so it's a little bit more delicate. It's easier to get finer details. For this one, I'm gonna put little lines on the flower petals. I'm not gonna do too many because again, if you do too many, it's just not going to translate very well to a tattoo. If you're illustrating, you can do as many lines as you want, and as long as visually it looks good, it's fine. But for the tattoo, I'm gonna try to keep it a little bit more simple and straightforward. So I'm only doing a couple lines per petal. And you can see the difference already. This looks more dimensional than these other flowers around it, just adding a few lines here and there. This would be shading with lines, more or less. There's a couple different terms for it. You could say cross-hatching, you could say stippling is where you do little dots, but it's basically creating depth in a drawing just using your pen without any sort of shading with the gradient or anything like that. Okay, so we're gonna go and add these here. There's different ways that you can shade leaves. Typically the leaf has a strong center with sort of lines coming off of it that carry the nutrients and collect the sun, I'm assuming. I don't know, I'm not a plantologist, but this is what they look like most of the time. But you can get creative with it. You can add lines in here. Another technique that I sometimes like to use, instead of making lines vertically like this, is kind of making a little bit more, treating the leaf as a whole, as a shape rather than as two divided parts. So kind of just making some lines along here. You can see that adds sort of an organic effect, like that. And then there is stippling, and this takes a really long time, so I'm not gonna do a whole lot, but you can see that this basically mimics the more dots that you put in one area, the darker the value in the image. And so if you have an area that you want to make darker, you just put more dots. And if you want it lighter, you make fewer dots. So you can do something like that. And this is called stippling. And there's a lot of tattoo artists that do some really amazing work that relies heavily on stippling. So that can be some good inspiration for you. And you can combine stippling with some line work as well. So here we already have a line existing, but you can add stippling like so. Okay, so I would consider the flowers and the greenery done overall. There are other things you could probably do to go in and add more detail, but for right now, I'm gonna say that's good. Moving on to the upper part. For this section, I'm gonna show you how to do some shading with the pencil. Now, pencil shading represents another technique in tattooing where instead of stippling or line work, they do shading with a needle that has a lot of different points, which makes a very sort of smooth, sort of like gradiated sort of approach. You can get a lot of nice textures, but also a lot of nice, very smooth light to darks as well. So that would be similar to what you can achieve with a pencil. So oftentimes for shading, you turn the pencil on its side and you can get some very interesting textures this way. If you start very light and then push down harder to get darker. And then think about where the overlaps are going to be. So this piece is overlapping this piece, which means there's probably going to be a shadow underneath it. So you can start here with a heavier touch, and you can sort of gradiate this out to be lighter. And the same with this. This is definitely underneath here. Like so. And you can experiment with different angles, different kinds of paper will give you a different texture. Like so. You can also do a combination of the side of the pencil and the tip of the pencil to get some lines. You can make lines with obviously the pencil tip as well to get some varying textures, something similar to that. And then the nice thing about the pencil as well is that once you've put in those tones and those textures, is you can go back in with your kneaded eraser and you can kind of put in highlights. You can erase back to the white of the paper to give you some highlights if you want. So like here, actually, I didn't want to put all of that in, so you can lighten that up. Like so. You can also erase anything that you draw outside. Okay. So that would be pencil shading. That's a very sort of simple approach, but you can use that same idea for a number of different usages. So now for the last part is going to be the wood at the bottom. And I am going to go back to 0.8, a little bit wider to give me a little bit bolder line. We're mimicking a barn. We're mimicking the texture of the barn. So we're just going to add in these lines for the boards. And again, we don't want them too close together. We want to be conscious about how far apart they are. But we're just going to add in very quickly these lines in the boards to mimic the natural wood grain. Add in some stippling as well for texture. You can add shadows underneath the boards because these would be the areas that would be the darkest. And then underneath, obviously thinking about the light source, you would have shadows on the boards that are lower down. You can do some cross hatching, some stippling for texture. And then that's more or less what you would do for the boards.